Hello, my name is Afrula Koutroubi. I am an architect and environmental health epidemiologist, and I'm currently completing a PhD in the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. My talk will be about overheating and occupant adaptive behaviors in naturally ventilated Nightingale wards in the tropics. Although architectural and medical historians have stressed the utilization of the pavilion plan system in hospital design for the facilitation of segregationist practices that foster racial and class inequalities, to date we lack a comprehensive history of pavilion plan hospitals in the British colonies. In my presentation, I will try to explore how colonial hospital architecture and environmental engineering define the thermal performance and adaptability of these buildings in today's post-colonial condition. Through a mixed methods case study of 4 Nightingale and 4 modern wards, I will show how the conceptualization of the hospital ward as an instrument for efficient ventilation and infection control transformed its layout and operation and contributed to energy-conscious design, and how differences in thermal conditions, thermal comfort, and occupant adaptive behaviors between the Nightingale wards and the rest of the case study wards were unfolded during contemporary operation. Colonial hospital buildings built before the 1940s, without mechanical systems for ventilation and cooling, constitute a significant part of the healthcare infrastructure across the equatorial zone of the global south. Natural ventilation likely remains the primary environmental mechanism for cooling and airborne infection control in hospitals among the poorest countries with the weakest public health system. In these hospitals, unmet rising space cooling needs, made necessary not only by climate change, but also by higher expectations of medical care as the COVID-19 pandemic evolves, could result in severe indoor overheating. The complex environmental and behavioral processes determining the indoor thermal conditions were recorded for the first time in real time over fieldwork of 9 weeks at Conant Hospital in Freetown, Sierra Leone. The mixed methods data collection protocol consisted of archival research, a building survey, indoor and outdoor environmental monitoring, photographic recording of the window openings, movement mapping, interviews, and a thermal comfort survey. Archival research was conducted at the National Archives in London, the British Library, and the State Library in Freetown. Historical evidence was also researched in digitized medical reports and reports by the Public Works Department, which were submitted annually between 1914 and 1961 by the British colonial government in Freetown. Conant Hospital was a critical case study. Its historical buildings were built according to basic principles of pavilion plan typology, while to date it remains the main government-run tertiary hospital with more than 40 doctors and 400 nurses across 15 departments and 12 medical and surgical wards. Conant Hospital is located at a historical site. As historian Alexander Cube described in his book about the history of Sierra Leone, published in 1962, in 1817, 9 years after the foundation of the British Crown colony of Freetown, the Royal Hospital and Asylum for Africans was founded at the King's Yard site as an institution for the provision of medical care and documentation to the newly arrived liberated African slaves. The new settlers entered the asylum from the King's Yard Gateway, which is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Monument, and currently stands within the premises of the Conant Hospital. According to Aldrich's book, published in 1910, in 1880, the Royal Hospital and Asylum for Africans became the Colonial Hospital, which, according to Alice's book, published in 1990, was renamed as Conant Hospital in tribute to the visit of the Duke of Connaught. Fife wrote in his book published in 1962 that the Colonial Hospital was the first medical institution for the application of Western medicine in British West Africa. It was probably also one of the first pavilion plan hospitals in British West Africa. Although the exact spatial distribution of the Colonial Hospital's buildings remains unspecified due to the absence of its plans from the National Archives in Kew, the British Library, and the State Archives in Freetown, a close reading of the Colonial Archives revealed that the Colonial Hospital was composed of a 2-story male ward block, and a two-story female ward block, which were connected with an outdoor corridor. The complex also included a prison infirmary, an isolation cottage, an outpatients block, and a mortuary. In February 1920, a catastrophic fire destroyed all the buildings of the hospital except the isolation cottage at its western side. All the services of the hospital were transferred to the old law courts building. A year later, the engineers of the Public Works Department in Freetown prepared the drawings for the new post-fire Connaught Hospital. By 1922, the first three ward blocks and the operation theatre were completed. In 1925, the colonial architect Archie Bitham drew a plan for future extensions at Connaught Hospital. It is evident that in the proposed site plan, Bitham followed the pre-established principles of the parallel position of ward blocks and the spatial dispersion of different uses in freestanding buildings, as these were originally applied at the colonial hospital. By 1929, the outpatient block, the medical store building, the administrative block, and the fourth ward block were built. In 1948, the quarters for the nursing sisters, which also contained the new private wards, were ready for occupancy. To investigate how Nightingale ward typology was adapted for the equatorial climates and how these ideas were realized in the construction of the pavilion plan building at Connaught Hospital, I compared the prototype ward for British India Station and the ward for Europeans at the Singapore General Hospital with the Nightingale wards at the case study hospital. This set of comparisons is guided by the following connecting histories. First, the comparison between the prototype ward for British India Station and Freetown's Connaught Hospital is driven by the fact that one of the key architects, Arthur Bitham, had worked as an assistant architect in Madras before arriving in Freetown. Second, the comparison between the ward for Europeans at the Singapore General Hospital and Connaught Hospital is meaningful, as Singapore General Hospital is the best historically documented pavilion plan hospital in the equatorial zone. In 1864, the Commission for the Barrack and Hospital Improvement published a report with recommendations for necessary changes in barracks and hospitals in British India. Florence Nightingale was a member of this commission. Building on her extensive work on European hospital design, Nightingale shared the idea, which was prominent among proponents of miasmatic theories at that time, that the built environment could be modified in order to amplify the healing potential of nature through the provision of fresh air and sunlight. Supporting the belief that infection can be airborne, she conceptualized the ward as an instrument for efficient ventilation, which through the provision of fresh air could provide effective protection from airborne infection. Nightingale insisted that nurses' control of ventilation rates and thermal conditions in the wards was an integral part of patients' care and recovery. In her influential book Notes on Hospitals, Nightingale recommended the spatial separation between the bedded space in the ward and the rest of the rooms, which accommodated the auxiliary services. Beds had to be placed with their heads facing the wall in only 2 rows at opposite directions and only in pairs between each window and without any partitions between them. Intending to maximize the opportunities for cross-ventilation, 19% of the north and south facade, respectively, had to be covered with openable windows. Not only the design of each pavilion, but also the spatial configuration of the whole hospital had to facilitate cross-ventilation. Each separate pavilion had to be next to each other in parallel positions and at a distance that was equal to 2 times the pavilion's height. In the prototype ward for the British barracks in India, the ward was located at the first floor, and a veranda ran along the south, west, and north sides, separating the ward from the rooms with the auxiliary uses at the west side, while the east side remained attached to the bedded area. In addition to recommendations with regards to the ward space use and layout, A system of spatial attributes for solar control, thermal mass, and occupant control ventilation was included in the report by the Commission. As illustrated in the prototype ward in British India, vertical shading was provided on the ground floor by a veranda and the first floor by the roof's overhangs. Shutters with angled louvers were installed between the pillars of the two stories. Thermal mass composed by cavity walls with empty air space between them and air bricks provided further protection against excess heat storage. At the same time, the roof had a suspended cross-ventilated structure and was covered with light-colored tiles. Ventilation rates had to be continuously high to dilute and extract the polluted air. 27% of the north and south facades of the bedded area, respectively, were covered with openable windows, which opened inwards and had sliding angled blinds. Doors were equipped with movable screens and top-hinged windows, while on the ground floor, the extraction of warm air was performed through an air shaft. Webster, who was an advisor of the board working on the construction of the Singapore General Hospital, wrote in 1924 that the design of the wards at the hospital aimed at maximum levels of natural ventilation and natural daylight, similar to an open-air space. The hospital had 800 beds across 3 groups of pavilions, separately for Europeans and non-European patients. In one of the pavilions for Europeans, the bedded area was placed centrally, was cross-ventilated and was fully shaded with a series of arches with shutters situated opposite the wards openings along the perimeter of the veranda. Openable windows were installed at the north and south facades, covering around 40% of each facade. As regards the Nightingale wards at the Connaught Hospital, the allocation of the bedded area at the centre and the auxiliary uses at the south, east and northwest wings at the front and back sides of the block demonstrated compliance with the recommended functional organisation of the wards in equatorial climates. However, extra beds were added at the peripheral zones whose functional purpose was probably different at the original drawings. Although these peripheral zones provided full protection from direct solar exposure, they also increased the distance between the opposite windows, functioning as inlets and outlets of the airflow in the cross ventilation system. The total volume of the ward was remarkably lower than those of the prototype ward in British India and the ward for Europeans at the Singapore General Hospital. Furthermore, an open-air veranda did not surround the bedded area, and the ceiling was disconnected from the cross-ventilated roof. Overall, Nightingale wards at the Singapore General Hospital and the Connaught Hospital had almost twice the recommended width-to-length ratios. Although they both had building envelopes with high thermal mass, only the Nightingale wards at Connaught Hospital did not have adequate shading. Comparing the Nightingale typology with the typologies of the rest of the case study wards at Connaught Hospital, it becomes evident that although the Nightingale typology had the highest facade coverage of openable windows, all 4 typologies had advantageous orientations towards the prevailing wind directions and they were cross-ventilated, except for Ward 2, which had single-sided ventilation. Lower width to length and width to floor-to-ceiling height ratios are indications of beneficial geometrical characteristics for the exploitation of natural ventilation. Among the case study typologies, only Ward 3 had a high width to floor-to-ceiling height ratio. In Freetown, Sierra Leone, a climate-responsive building envelope would protect from overheating from 9 in the morning to 7 in the evening, when outdoor temperatures exceed 25 degrees Celsius. It would also exploit the strong outdoor winds between 1 in the afternoon and 6 in the evening, while protecting from the indoor accumulation of humidity from 3 at night to 8 in the morning. However, as regards the drivers of environmental performance during contemporary operation at Connaught Hospital's Nightingale wards, the windows in all selected wards lacked adequate shading devices and double glazed windows, while internal Window curtains trapped solar radiation and by convection induced higher adjacent air temperatures. At the same time, heat gains by conduction through the heavyweight external and internal walls and by convection through the uninsulated ceilings and floors reduced the potential of nocturnal cooling, contributing to higher nighttime overheating. The assessment of the thermal conditions, the thermal comfort, and the adaptive behaviors of the case study Nightingale and modern wards was based on one of the largest samples of environmental and behavioral data collected in real time in operational wards in the tropics. Data analysis was conducted through the application of descriptive and inferential statistics and content analysis. Over the dry season, indoor environmental monitoring in the case study ward showed that the periods with the highest indoor temperatures coincided with the nurses' and doctors' rounds and the highest exposure to solar radiation. Although all selected wards began to cool down after 5 p.m. at different starting points, only the Nightingale wards had the fastest cooling rates and the most extended periods of lower indoor nighttime temperatures. As regards indoor relative humidity levels, an upward trend which began after 5 p.m. lasted until midnight, and although it became weaker, it continued until 6 a.m. All case study buildings had mean 24-hour indoor temperatures between approximately 28 and 31 degrees Celsius, with the pavilion plant building accommodating the wards with the lowest mean temperatures and the highest mean relative humidity both during the dry and the rainy seasons. Significant levels of overheating were modeled in all case study wards even after the application of an adaptive thermal comfort standard modified for different relative humidity levels. Measured air velocities indicated moderate strength of indoor air flows in all selected typologies, with slightly higher air velocities being performed close to window area with open windows only in the Nightingale typology and in Ward 4. Recorded wind opening behaviors remained irresponsive to indoor and outdoor environmental changes, with median total percentages of open aperture staying below 50% in most case study wards, and with very low differences between the morning and the evening shifts. Consistently more climate responsive wind opening behaviors were not observed among the Nightingale wards. Thermal comfort can be broadly defined as a physiological and psychological state of content with the conditions of the ambient environment defined by the levels of temperature, humidity, and airflow. Reported votes of perception, comfort, and preference in relation to indoor levels of temperature showed that participants felt slightly warm or warm and uncomfortable and preferred slightly cooler temperatures. As regards the levels of humidity, votes of high to moderate levels of sensation and discomfort were prevalent during both seasons, with preferences for less and more humid conditions prevailing during the rainy and dry season respectively. Seasonal differences were not found in airflow-related votes, with votes of unacceptability and preferences for higher airflows gaining the majority during both seasons. The Nightingale wards had the highest reported comfort only in relation to indoor wind speed levels experienced by nurses during both seasons. Assessing the strength of correlation and the impact size in the thermal conditions, thermal comfort, and adaptive behaviors in diverse samples between the Nightingale wards and the rest of the wards, strong correlations were found between lower levels of overheating and higher willingness to operate fans indoors in the case study wards at the pavilion plant building. To sum up, in the late 19th century, architects and engineers, building on Florence Nightingale's experience in hospital design, developed and applied principles of environmental engineering for the maximization of the potential for natural ventilation in colonial hospitals across the equatorial zone. This is an indication that historical Nightingale wards might be more suitable to be repurposed for the treatment of COVID-19 cases across the global south. However, attention needs to be paid to interventions in the building envelopes and the operational schedules that might have reduced any embodied capacity for higher ventilation performance. At the Nightingale wards of Conrad Hospital, although space use and layout remained relatively unchanged, climate irresponsive building environmental performances and occupant controlled window opening behaviors limited the performance and cooling potential of natural ventilation. However, air velocities were slightly higher and overheating was marginally lower in the case study Nightingale wards, while their occupants were more willing to interact with environmental controls. Design of windows in hospital wards, which is primarily driven by security, safety, and maintenance concerns and vector control, limits the accessibility and the easiness of window operation. At the same time, hospital occupants in the strictly regulated hospital environments are not expected to act in order to restore thermal comfort at an individual level and through their interaction with environmental controls. However, in naturally ventilated spaces, thermal adaptability needs to be strengthened, and occupants need to be trained to operate the windows in climate-responsive ways. It is important to remember, as Nightingale pointed out, that patients' recovery can be improved through the control of ventilation rates and thermal conditions in the wards. Thank you, and please do not hesitate to contact me for any questions.